Entering the Mayo Experience.
Mayo Experience. Mayo Experience. Mayo Experience. Experience.
Welcome to the Pat Mayo Experience. Changing gears a little bit from what we normally talk about of losing bets. We got to talk about some sports media rights today and what's going on in the sports landscape. So reminder to all of you out there to smash the like button to the episode, sub to Mayo Media Network on YouTube, the Pat Mayo Experience on Apple Podcasts, on Spotify. If you really want to be a friend of the show, you will turn on those auto downloads that Apple Podcasts turned off on everyone to really help us out, get us back up in the charts. We were flirting with number one in sports and betting, and I would like to get back up to number one in sports and betting, both in the U.S. and in Canada. That would be very nice. Geoff Fienberg is on the line with me. Thanks for setting this one up, Geoff. This is great.
Yeah, I'm really excited to be talking to Richard today, Pat. And just to make it about me for myself, in a past life, I found out I lost my job at TSN through Richard. I had booked Richard to join us that day, and I guess in a confirmation email I sent before bed, and I wake up the next morning, and Richard, being the gentleman that he is, let me know that he got on the matter of our interview, got another suspicious interview from someone else claiming that they were now taking over the producing roles of the show I was responsible for. I was able to put two and two together, and needless to say, I didn't exactly go into work that day. I held onto my phone. I called in sick, and I, had to just plan for a moment. So I'm always, Richard and I, at least for me, I always share a moment in my journey with Richard, and I have booked him for many years on satellite radio and over at TSN, and I'm happy to get a chat with him today.
Richard Deitsch, the writer at The Athletic, host of the Sports Media Podcast. Has that one example happened to you numerous times over the course of your career?
Well, first of all, it's great to be with you guys. I don't think this booking is going to get you to number one, Pat, but I still wish you the best on that. Yeah, I mean, I do remember that with Geoff. The one thing about writing about media is, you do get tipped on. Usually it's sort of larger scale stuff when there's going to be layoffs at a place like an ESPN or a place like that. Earlier in my career, I did more of that. I sort of came up with whether it's right or wrong, more of a kind of a premise of letting people sort of announce that they've been laid off as opposed to sort of breaking individual names. Whether that's right or wrong, that's just sort of how I've sort of done it the last couple of years. I certainly other writers may think of it differently, but it really just speaks to the larger issue of just how hard it is in 2024 to maintain legacy media jobs, and how, as we head forward, your best bet really is to sort of own your own content and to try to figure out a way to make money directly from consumers. Because if you've just spent any moment of time in the space in the last 6 months to 12 months, all you've seen is an endless drumbeat of layoffs at major places.
And it's beyond major places, even at the moment, even in the sports betting sphere, the daily fantasy sphere, where there was a lot of money being pumped in over time. We've even seen layoffs in our space of ones that we didn't really see coming, as a lot of these companies are starting to consolidate and they're taking different approaches towards marketing. So like the big gambling companies in general, they had their first wave of spending, and it's not like they're not spending money, but even someone like DraftKings signing on with LeBron James, I mean, that takes a lot of the marketing budget out for people like me, people like Geoff, and people even smaller in the sphere and slightly bigger in the sphere who do own their own content, but still do rely on some of the bigger gambling places to fund the content. Like, that money is now drying up too.
Yeah, I mean, listen, there was the gold rush, of course, when legalized gambling came to the States and came to Ontario, and there was the people who got in early with some of these companies were always going to get a pretty nice sizable paycheck to either be sponsored by, said company or to be part of said company. The space has matured a little bit, and you're not going to see those free money deals like we used to. The other thing too is, and this is just the realities of the marketplace, there's always going to be money for a name entity, a famous athlete who wants to, who wants to be part of your enterprise or organization, or a famous athlete who's willing to sponsor said company. Like, that's not going to change. And that's sort of been going on since the dawn of time. But, one thing that has changed, and this is just sort of the realities of the marketplace, is that athletes now have become their own media distributors, whether it's production companies owned by like LeBron, you see the Kelsey brothers obviously have their own massive podcast entity now. Kevin Durant's got his own production company. Steph Curry does. So the list is endless. And that's one thing that's very, very new, is athlete owned or athlete generated content. And now that content is competing against everybody else. And it does make, it makes the space more challenging, right? Because there's only so many advertising dollars to go around.
In terms of, I just want to talk Super Bowl for a second, because the Peacock, everyone complained about, in the States at least, I mean, we're blessed, as Geoff always points out in Canada, that no matter if something's on an OTT service or it's over here, if it's over here, we just kind of get it for not free on TV, but our regular TV stations will just play that game, whatever, because of the media rights in Canada versus the US. But the NFL and Peacock getting everyone to sign up for that one game, do you think we'll ever see a year, maybe not in the next 10 years, but at some point where the Super Bowl becomes a pay-per-view product?
It's a good question. Actually, such a question that I literally wrote about it today on The Athletic. And so it really is about your time frame. I don't believe that the Super Bowl will be a pay-per-view product or on a streaming service within the current landscape of the deal that exists today. And the current deal goes to 2033. With CBS, Fox, ESPN, Amazon, NBC, etc. So I think that I don't think the NFL would try to blow up that deal and place its most important inventory behind a paywall when they already have these existing arrangements. So then this gets us to 2034. I still think in 2034, which is 10 years away, that the league philosophy will be to put the Super Bowl on a place with the biggest reach. And I still expect the biggest reach to be some version of over-the-air, free-to-air television. It'll be reduced, but I don't think that it'll be to the point where that's still not a powerful medium, where their biggest product will be there. If you then go another 5 to 10 years, that's where I would not be surprised anymore. I do think the Peacock game was very, very significant in that it felt like a line had been crossed. And, for a postseason game, for the NFL to charge you for that, it does feel very, very different than just like Amazon Thursday Night Football. So if in like a 2040 or something like that, whether it's Netflix or an Amazon, just really, and, again, the contracts are open, decides to just give the NFL just an inordinate amount of money to put the Super Bowl behind a paywall, I would not be surprised if that happens. But I don't. And again, I could be wrong, and maybe I'm miscalculating the NFL's lust for money. But I don't think they're going to do this within the current contract that they have. I think they'd be opening themselves up for more trouble than it's worth. That's, at least if you ask me today in 2024, that's my read on it right now.
Yeah,
but the full expectation is like we're going to see an expansion of the Peacock situation through maybe other playoff games and these streaming platforms.
100%. There is no way that the Peacock game this year will be the last playoff game on a streaming service. No, unquestionably not. The NFL can play around with how it wants to do that, particularly in the wild card round. They could do that in the divisional round if they want to figure out a way to sort of create a new piece of inventory and then make that a one-off for the networks. The conference championship games get a little bit trickier because I think contractually those are bound, at least at the moment, to CBS and Fox. I mean, again, I don't have the contract. None of us know it. The lawyers at the NFL know it, and the networks know it. Maybe there's some outs there where they can do that. But I think, again, this is just me, sort of speculating. I think the divisional playoff game and maybe the wild card playoff game absolutely up for grabs in terms of a streaming play. I think they would not go to the conference championships or the Super Bowl during this current deal. But you're absolutely going to see during the regular season. If you remember that Bills Chargers game that was on was on Peacock, you're absolutely going to see more of that as we head forward for sure. That I can guarantee.
Do you think it becomes a situation where, off the top, we talked about creators owning their own content, athletes owning their own production companies, and just being able to both control the narrative and get all the profits for themselves? Obviously, there's a lot of luxury in saying, hey, CBS produced this game for us, NBC produced this game for us. In 10 years' time, though, when these streaming networks and networks in general probably consolidate even more than they already have, do you think that there's ever a world where the NFL just creates its own product and then you just directly have to pay them?
Well, the issue there would be, why would you eliminate yourself if you're in the NFL, right? From getting money from outside of your own place. I mean, I guess if you sort of were going to take your thought process and move it forward, they would have to charge a certain amount of money, right, to make up for whatever the lost rights fees would be from the CBSs and the NBC. So I don't know how much I think the NFL actually would like to get out of media more than anything else. This is why they're trying to, sell NFL media and try to, get away from the NFL network running that kind of stuff. So I don't know if I see that. The one thing I should mention, for the people who are going to listen to this, and this is a real factor when it comes to would the Super Bowl be behind a paywall ever, is you do have to have a place that can do the production. And right now, like, Netflix doesn't have an NFL production. You cannot give a NFL game to Netflix right now or Apple and expect them to put it on. They would have to essentially outsource that to an NBC or a CBS or ESPN or whoever does games. So that's another thing to watch in terms of, like, if you're thinking about all this stuff. Amazon has an NFL structure in place because they do Thursday Night Football. But until the Apples of the world and the Netflixes of the world hire production people to do games, they're not going to do it. The NFL is not going to give them their inventory until they get a proof of concept like they have with Amazon. So, if you extrapolate it heading forward, depending where Amazon is in terms of the amount of money and market cap it has, Amazon could be a real bet to get a Super Bowl behind a paywall. The reason why I think obviously everybody thinks about Netflix is the potential here is just because Netflix has just so much money to play with, and they could blow the NBCs and the ESPNs and the Foxes out of the water if they ever decided to just bid on this stuff.
Is this why they ended up going with WWE as its major live property in the sports realm, because they have all their in-house production?
Absolutely. Big reason why Netflix, I think, was interested in that. The other thing is it's sports entertainment, right? And it's a little bit different than live sports. And I think that fits into the sort of the Netflix, I won't say philosophy, but their portfolio. WWE makes more sense for Netflix, which essentially is a streaming entertainment service where people, I think, are used to figuring out what entertainment they want. And I think people, even though I have immense respect for WWE performers. They are athletes for sure, but at the end of the day, it's scripted programming. It's entertainment more than a sporting event. And I think that fits more into what Netflix does than, say, if Netflix, went after the tennis tour or something like that. But again, I think Netflix is going to use the WWE as a bit of a trial balloon to see how it plays on Netflix, to see what kind of the subscriptions they get, to see how it works. And then maybe Netflix makes a decision that, hey, we're going to invest in live sports. What would then happen is, again, I'm not a Netflix expert, but if you just sort of think about it logically, what they would do is probably just allocate less money to coming up with these original programs on the entertainment side and just use that money to get into the sports realm. But there are going to be smart people who run all this stuff through whatever databases they run to figure out, is it worth it for us to go into live sports as opposed to invest that money in entertainment properties.
Taking it down a level from sort of these big macro issues, Richard, fresh out of an NFL coaching cycle with 7 open jobs, the ability to make coordinators hot or not, like, who has that sort of power in the media space? Or I say that the power for which the NFL media types have in that space, does that not, it seems to play such a paramount role in with owners and who actually gets these jobs, and clearly our perception of them, and the people making those tweets and or those lists, they clearly seem to know the power they have. But I guess in a roundabout way, who actually has the ability to make these hot and not lists that clearly create so much power in the coaching cycles?
Well, here's what I would say. If you're an owner, if you're an NFL owner and you are basing your employment off a hot not list from some writer or television personality, you're insane. You're not doing your job correctly. I would hope that there's due diligence on the part of ownership or general managers to figure out like who the best coaches or who the up and coming coaches are. That said, no doubt that if you're a major media figure and you put out there that like Coach X is hot or assistant Coach X is in demand, I mean, that stuff gets a lot of traction in the media. I don't know, though, if traction then leads to hiring. You know what I mean? Like, I think at a certain point, I mean, at least I hope that these organizations have like a running list of coaches who they think are, you know, bright and upcoming coaches in the ranks, and then they hire them. What I find, and again, I don't cover the NFL, but obviously I know a ton of people who do. What it strikes me is a lot of these jobs really happen based on relationships. Like, you know, if you are part of a, you know, coaching tree, like, you know, you're part of like whatever, the Belichick coaching tree or the Shanahan coaching tree. And you know, you get vetted by said coach and then recommended to another organization to get hired. But I think a lot of the sort of the hot coaching prospect, that's sort of great for content, and obviously it gets a lot of traction. But I think if you are any kind of ownership group that's doing its hiring in a correct way, you are not relying on like what ESPN says is the hot coaching list. You're doing your own research here.
Great. I want to bring this back to broadcasting now, because I would think so many of the people who watch and listen to Pat and I are part of that echo chamber who believes that there is something wrong with Tony Romo, that whatever happened at the beginning, it's just not the same anymore. And then you see the comments from Romo, and he can anecdotally point to walking on the street and saying, people love me, people say hi. And, you know, Twitter is just like an evil echo chamber. Do you think CBS is at all concerned about what is happening there? Because the broadcast feels so disjointed. We know what a good Jim Nantz broadcast sounds like when it is, I don't know, when there's more symmetry in it. Or am I just in much of this audience part of an echo chamber that doesn't resonate with what CBS actually thinks?
Well, listen, I mean, everybody's going to, you have your beliefs. And so you feel how you feel about a Nance Romo broadcast. You have your beliefs, how you feel about a Olsen Burkhart broadcast. What I can tell you is CBS isn't going to change Tony Romo, and certainly not next year. Whatever is sort of happening or whatever happens in a given weekend on social media is not impacting management. He's signed long-term and they like the job they've done. Here's what I would say, and I'm someone, again, who really was high on Romo when he first came out. I think some of it, to be very honest with you, I agree with Tony Romo. I think a lot of this is an overreaction to Romo being sort of the piñata analyst of the moment who gets knocked on a weekend. Al Michaels sort of just went through the same fray over the last couple of years. Broadcast, you know, Joe Buck has sort of seen that many, many times over. This happens. We'll see if it ever happens to Greg Olsen. Do I think that Romo is as fresh as he was in 2017, 2018? Of course not. I don't think so at all. But I know many people on that CBS crew, they all prepare. They all work their ass off. The idea that Tony Romo's not preparing is ridiculous. But I do think at times, yeah, Nance and Romo have been a little off chemistry-wise. But I still think it's a good broadcast. And maybe now I'm in the minority on that. You know, I don't know, but I'm not going to sort of change my mind on that. But, you know, the issue with Romo is that he's not new anymore and he's not fresh. And once you sort of get past that, you're judged in a different way. And it'll be interesting to see what happens with Brady. If he gets off to a great hot start, people will love Brady, and Brady will sort of be the new fresh face, and he'll a lot of people will be talking about him. Conversely, obviously, if he starts off like Jason Witten or something like that, it'll be endless, and like he'll be trending on Twitter all the time. I will say, again, as I've written this for a long time, and again, maybe you need fresher voices than me. I'd be the first to admit that. I do find that like you can take anybody, the greatest broadcaster, and if you just sit there and like analyze every single second of a broadcast, you're always going to find mistakes. You're always going to find something off. It's a 3-hour live wire, and it's not easy to do. And I think that one of the things that game changed all this is social media makes all of us in some ways a critic, right? Twitter wasn't around when John Madden and Pat Summerall did games. And I can promise you, as you know, historic and great a team those guys were, if you watch one of their broadcasts today, you would find mistakes. Like it's just the inevitable. So I think, I mean, again, this is just from my perception. I think some of it is a bit of a pinata effect when it comes to Romo, but there are definitely people I respect who, you know, who do think that broadcast has taken down a notch. And it doesn't mean I'm right. It doesn't mean they're right. It doesn't mean I'm wrong. It doesn't mean they're wrong. It's such a subjective thing. It's really just about how you feel about a certain broadcast.
And a lot of it has to do, too, that as an internet community, we just like to beat up on someone. Right now, Tony Romo's the punching bag. Like, you kind of ran through all of the major broadcasters have gone through this. Yeah. Like, think about Aikman. Aikman for 10 years was Sleepy Troy. He goes to ESPN, and he's reinvigorated, and we all love him again.
Yep. Well, the one thing I would say is, and this is true, and this is when Romo was accurate on this, how many times do people just go on Twitter on a daily basis and just praise, like, things? Like, nobody goes on and was like, man, you know, Taylor Swift, just phenomenal. Great job. Great performance. You know what I'm saying? It's more likely someone's going on and saying, oh, Taylor Swift, CIA psych op. You know, she's you know, she's a plant so that the Chiefs will win the Super Bowl. My point is just that, like, social media and its algorithms, they do reward, I hate to say it, they just sort of reward negativity, I think, more than positivity. And it's a place to vent many times when it comes to sports. And again, sometimes that's like fun and it's sort of fun to read. And if you know, trust me, I feel for all the Bills fans who, you know, once again have to have a season that ends abruptly. So I get it. But I do think your Aikman example is perfect. Like, for so many years, Aikman took some shots. Now when he goes to ESPN, and there's sort of a narrative out there like that Joe and Troy have solved ESPN's Monday Night Football problem. Well, you know what I mean? Like the way you think about Aikman now is different. Although I will say, I think Aikman's been an excellent broadcaster for a long time, and I think Buck and Aikman are a really, really solid team, and they've had a really, really good 2-year stretch since they've gone to ESPN.
I think a lot of it too that I mean, the island games have just been so bad in the NFL over the past 3 years or so that you just get these crappy games. Then you're like, oh yeah, Phil for 3 hours. Because if you're just watching on a regular Sunday and there's 8 games on at once and if the Vikings-Packers game isn't all that entertaining, well, you're not going to stick around for the 3 hours to hear the C Squad on Fox continue to do that game. You're just going to pop over to another game. I do think it's much easier to broadcast a really interesting, good game versus one where you're sitting there trying to think like, man, how long until this is over?
Yeah, a couple of very, very famous and well-known producers and directors always tell me that the easiest games that they do are the great games, are the games that are close, the games that are tight. In many ways, the broadcast takes care of itself. The hardest games to do are often blowouts when, you know, the producer, director, broadcasters, they really gotta earn their money. They gotta fill. And it gets to sort of what you're saying is if it's a game between like two teams that nationally have great interest with the public, you're into it. Like, you know, you want to see like you want to watch that Chiefs Bills game, maybe even if you're not a Chiefs or a Bills diehard. It's much, much different if it's like, you know, the Jaguars against the Texans. And you're right, the number 4 team from Fox is doing that game. It plays differently. So yes, I agree with you that Romo, Nance, Olsen, Burkhardt, Aikman, Buck, etc. They have some advantages because they get to call the best teams and the teams that people are interested in. Right?
Would you?
Richard.
Oh, go ahead, Geoff.
I was just gonna make it about
you.
Will we be seeing like a data scientist, sports data scientist join the booth the same way that we are seeing a ref join the booth to talk about the replays? Because all we have right now is a chyron that says 4th and 3, go. And I've never seen it not say go. And I'm not one of these take the points guys. I've totally been converted to the data. But I feel like in the same way that we have the ex-officials talking to us and explaining it, I feel like there should be the voice who's explaining what's really changing in football.
I don't think we'll see that on conventional broadcasts anytime soon. We could see that on like a megacast play where if you brought in a heavy analytics person or a data scientist to sort of explain the numerology around making decisions, I could see that. But I don't think, given the amount of limited time that an NFL game provides for that stuff, I don't know if they're going to get into that level of detail. I think they, at least at the moment, networks feel like they can sort of handle that in graphical elements. But that's an interesting suggestion. And again, as the more megacast kind of idea comes, where you can sort of choose your own programming when it comes to how you want to watch a game, I could totally see a niche group of people who want to hear from a data scientist on decisions when it comes to like fourth downs and stuff like that.
How successful have things? I mean, the Manning cast feels like it's on an island by itself because it's Peyton and Eli. It's on ESPN. What is the viability for some of these other megacast type streams? I know that the championship game for college football had sort of the coaches cast some of the years, and people really enjoyed that. But in terms of, like, let's say Amazon. So Amazon runs the Thursday night game. They have their main broadcast. What is preventing them from having 6 other streams that you can flick to on Amazon? Just change the, from English to stream 1, stream 2, stream 3 for the commentary tracks. And you have the gambling one. You have the data scientist one. Like, are people actually interested in that? Or is that just something people online say that they are, but they would actually never use?
Yeah, I mean, what it is the companies have to make a decision as to whether the labor costs and the production costs are worth it. So ESPN obviously thinks the Manning cast is. Part of the reason is, they get a little over 1 million people watching it, but also they want to be in business with Omaha Productions and Eli and Peyton. So that's a business decision that they make. If you're in Amazon, you'd have to sort of make a real calculated database decision, like how many people would watch a data scientist channel. I don't think at this point enough people would to make it worth their while. ESPN has changed up its college football championship megacast options. We used to have the coaches film room all the time. We don't have that anymore. And I think they've made decisions based on what's best for them. So for instance, they had the McAfee group do ESPN2 this year because they want to use that as a marketing tool for Pat McAfee's show. So I think that a lot of times the megacast decisions are twofold. One, it's what can we give viewers that's interesting, but also two, what can we do that's going to help promote our brand writ large?
Well, it seems like now having that relationship with Penn, with ESPN Bet, that having an ESPN Bet cast on something or other as even a trial balloon would make a ton of sense.
I agree. I think you will definitely, as we head forward, see more gambling oriented programs on some legacy places. I don't think there's any question about that.
Are you surprised? Sorry, just 1 second, Jeff. Are you surprised that, like, just shifting to Canada for a second, because TSN was bought out by FanDuel, and it seems like Sportsnet's trying to get into bed with everyone, but hasn't been able to get into bed with anyone in terms of their broadcast. I think that TSN has done a good job on football with their segments in between commercials, in between games, of going to the digital studio in-house where they can actually talk about the bets and be like, hey, I will play this. Here's why this is going to happen. It's really the only thing I've seen on Canadian TV that does that. Otherwise, it's just regular broadcasters who seem to have no clue what gambling lines mean, just simply reading out gambling lines with no context whatsoever. Do you think we're going to get to a point either on deal 2 with this, and this applies to the major networks in the States as well, that once gambling becomes a bit more mature and the market matures a little bit more, that you'll actually have people who know, I don't want to say what they're talking about when it comes to gambling, but at least understanding what a minus in front of a number means?
Yeah, I think at this point the Canadian networks they're just basically taking the money, right? I mean, that's they need that for survival in some ways. They need that for revenue, and they're going to incorporate their own talent into that. But yeah, I think as the market matures, you'll have more quote unquote like sports gambling experts as part of that inventory. But the real question is how much will that be part of the programming? And that I can't tell you. I don't know how much gambling is going to be part of Sportsnet or TSN heading forward. Right now, it's a ton. It's everywhere. And I think the reason it's everywhere is because that's probably their best sort of revenue stream or new revenue stream that's coming in. But yeah, as the market mature, I mean, I think just if you think about it logically, there'll just be more people who go into that, who have that expertise. But I'm also not so sure that you're going to see 24/7 like gambling coverage on Sportsnet or TSN. I don't think we're going to get to that level. But yeah, I mean, I think logically they'll hire more people who have that kind of background. I think as they head forward. But the real question, like everything else, is how much money is going to be in the space as the space matures and as some companies, inevitably end up folding or merging with others.
Really appreciate, Richard, you taking the time for us today. We'll let you go here in just a moment, but we are so big and, well, we do so much in the golf space, be it gambling, talking golf. So I couldn't let you go without just sort of getting your thoughts or anything you could tell us about what might happen with Live TV and golf. Obviously, there might have been an opportunity for them yesterday with Pebble not playing, and they had an event going. I don't know if Pat has an actual question here, maybe, because I'm just hanging it out there. But any thoughts on Live and its future on TV, because it needs consistency for people like my 80-year-old dad to know when it's on to actually watch it, because he'd be happy to see John Rahm and Phil and Bryson hit golf shots if he knew how to get it and watch it.
I laugh because it's like literally one sport that I don't particularly follow very, very closely outside of the majors, and that includes sort of the media coverage of it. I think inevitably the PGA will sort of find enough money to sort of continue. I'm not continue, obviously, it exists, but the PGA will have funding heading forward so that tour is solvent and continues. I don't know ultimately who's going to sort of fund it, but I think historically there's no way that that's going to blow up. The Live thing is interesting because obviously they just got Rahm. They have a lot of terrific golfers there. But like at the moment, they have not been able to pop when it comes to traditional broadcast places. And again, admittedly, this is not my big expertise, but I think the only way that happens is if they eventually find a very broad-based platform to do that. And the PGA has existing broadcast relationships with places that's not going to go there. So, my thought would be like, I don't know, we started this whole conversation with Super Bowl and streaming. Would like a Netflix or an Amazon or an Apple or someplace like that really go bold and try to create Live and make them that, a massive sort of property or entity on one of those places? I don't know. I know they have a lot of money and they may not run out of it, but I think at a certain point you do need, you need some traction with the mainstream, and that has not happened yet.
I think golf is at a big disadvantage in that aspect that it probably skews by far the oldest when it comes to your average viewer, that putting things on Netflix. I mean, Geoff had to show his parents how to go on YouTube to find Live. That it's very complicated when you're dealing with a demo that's like 60 plus as the majority of your audience.
It's a great point. But again, as sort of stream becomes more mainstream, you will have older people sort of more facile with it. I will say this, we also are heading to an era where the generation that's, 60 plus, 65 plus has more disposable income than any other generation before them. And you would think because of that, Netflix, Amazon, Apple, Paramount Plus, et cetera, will not be so foreign to them just as a concept. But yeah, it's a real issue in that, like, the reason why broadcast television, free to air television still exists because millions and millions and millions of people still, still think of ABC and CBS as NBC as sort of their content or their television. So you are correct in that. I wish I had a better feel. I don't know how it's going to play between Live and PGA heading forward. I mean, usually the quick answer is you sort of bet on money. Whoever has the most money ultimately wins. I don't know how it's going to play, but historically in life, that's usually what happens.
Richard Deitsch at Richard Deitsch on Twitter, at theathletic.com, where not only Richard, but a lot of friends of Geoff and I are writing these days, and the Sports Media Podcast. Check that out on Apple or wherever you get your podcast. Thank you so much for being on the line.
Thanks, fellas. Appreciate the invite.
Geoff Fienberg at gfienberg17, where you can follow him on X as well at the PME. For me, thank you all for watching. Smash the like on the way out, and I will see you next time.
That Mayo experience! Experience!